Good evening and welcome everybody. My name is Amy Homa. I'm the director and president of the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures. The Academy Museum is the largest institution in the United States devoted to the arts, sciences, and artists of movie making. We strive to tell the many stories of the movies, including their social impact on local and global communities. It's exciting to see how different communities have embraced us, and alongside in partnership and allyship with them, we are able to bring meaningful conversations to our theaters, just like the one we are about to witness. In step with our program and conversation this evening, I would love to encourage everyone to come back and visit our Impact Reflection Gallery on level 2 of our exhibition space. It's part of our Stories of Cinema, the museum's core exhibition. The gallery is dedicated to exploring cinema's contributions to the cultural conversations that surrounds pressing social issues and the art form's capacity to shape public awareness, as well as consider how movie makers have investigated and exposed issues related to climate change, civil rights, and labor relations. Before we begin, I would like to thank our ASL interpreters who will be assisting today. Their names are Andrea Lest and Ajuma Brown. Can we give them a round of applause, please? Tonight we are joined by Academy Award-winning screenwriter Cord Jefferson and 2023 Berggruen Prize laureate Dr. Patricia Hill Collins, a renowned sociologist specializing in the study of race, class, and gender, for a conversation about how her scholarship and how his film, American Fiction, challenges dominant stereotypes and narratives around Black life, cultural perspectives, and experiences. This will all be followed by a screening of the film. A 2023 Berggruen Prize laureate, Dr. Patricia Hill Collins is a renowned sociologist specializing in the study of race, class, and gender. She is a pioneer of the concept of intersectionality, helping to develop analysis of the interactions among different forms of inequity and oppression. Her 2019 book, Intersectionality as Critical Social Theory, is a landmark in developing the concept and insight into a substantial analytical framework. In 2008, she became the 100th president of the American Sociological Association, the first African-American woman elected to this position in the organization's 104-year history. Can we please give a round of applause for her accomplishments? In 2002, she was elected as a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, one of the oldest learned societies in the United States. And in 2023, she was awarded the prestigious Berggruen Prize for Philosophy and Culture, an award given annually to an individual whose ideas have profoundly shaped human self-understanding and advancement in a rapidly changing world. She is a distinguished university professor of sociology emerita at the University of Maryland, College Park, and she's also the former head of the Department of African American Studies at the University of Cincinnati. Cord Jefferson is an Academy Award-winning and Emmy Award-winning writer and director who has worked on some of the most complex and popular series of the past decade and has earned praise for being one of the most multifaceted and versatile storytellers. Jefferson made his feature writing and directorial debut with tonight's picture, American Fiction, which won an Academy Award in the category of Best Adapted Screenplay and garnered 5 total Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture. Jefferson also won a Critics' Choice Award, a BAFTA Award, and Film Independent Spirit Award for his screenplay, an adaptation of Percival Everett's novel Erasure. He was also nominated for Outstanding Directorial Achievement in a First-Time Theatrical Feature Film at the DGA Awards and the Darryl F. Zanuck Award for Outstanding Producer of Theatrical Motion Pictures at the PGA Awards. Prior to making his way into television and film, Jefferson was a journalist, most notably serving as the West Coast editor for Gawker. During his tenure in journalism, Jefferson also wrote for such outlets as the New York Times, National Geographic, NPR, USA Today, MSNBC, Book Forum, and the Daily Beast, among others. I would also like to give special thanks to the Berggruen Institute, our co-presenters for tonight's program. We adore working with them. So please join me in welcoming Niles Gilman, Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President at the Berggruen Institute.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Niles Gilman. I'm the Vice President and COO of the Berggruen Institute. the Institute and Studio B, which is our production and storytelling arm, are delighted to partner with the Academy Museum to host this ongoing series where we explore the intersection of cinematic arts and technology, philosophy, and society through discussions with luminaries across fields, such as tonight. For those new to our work, since 2010, we've forged novel frameworks of thought in democracy, capitalism, planetary politics, science, technology, philosophy, and culture. We foster also dialogue between East and West, developing shared perspectives about our changing world. We have 3 centers, one here in Los Angeles, that's our headquarters, as well as in Beijing and in Venice, Italy. And our goal is to create a planetary network of thinkers from across diverse disciplines and cultures. A signature program of the Institute, the Berggruen Prize, is a $1 million award that recognizes major achievements in advancing ideas that shape our world. Past recipients include Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Dr. Paul Farmer, Kojin Karatani, and most recently, Patricia Hill Collins, who's going to be here with us tonight. We already heard about Collins's achievements, but I'll just say again, she's an esteemed sociologist and social theorist. She's worked to develop the concept of intersectionality and to elevate Black feminist thought, particularly with regard to issues of power and justice, as well as how these things connect to politics, academia, commerce, and culture. Tonight we're in for a real treat, I think. We're fortunate to pair Dr. Collins together with my friend and the prolific and brilliant Academy Award-winning writer and director of American fiction, Cord Jefferson. His film, which was one of my favorites last year, is in many ways, I think, an artistic complement to Dr. Collins's work. It is precisely these kinds of, if you will, intersections that the Institute aims to make possible through this series with the Academy and beyond. And without further ado, Jefferson and Collins. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you
Hard
all
to
so much
see
for
you.
being here. It
Hard
is a
to
little
see
hard to
them.
see them,
yeah.
but it's okay.
Are they a good-looking crowd or not?
I think they're gonna. I mean,
Are they smart-looking?
it's
I'm
Los
hoping.
Angeles. I have to think
Ah,
that there's
okay.
a lot. There's some Ozempic out there. Let's have. Yeah, it's okay. It's our city.
Well, we're here to have a conversation. We just met on Zoom, and in preparing for this wonderful event, and my new best friend who's up here, I did homework. To learn about film and also to learn about your film. And I also heard Percival Everett present on his work, but not on Erasure. So I'm going to start off with a film question so I can sound kind of like I know film, and then we can move on to some things that might bounce off of what I'm saying. You know, what made you decide, what drew you to Erasure as the story you wanted to tell?
So, about 3 months before I found Erasure, I had sent in a script to a network, and I had received some notes on it. And one of the notes that came back to me was that the lead character, who's a Black man, needed to be blacker. And I said that note came through an emissary, came through my manager, and he was like, I don't know who said that, but this is one of their notes. And I said, you go back and tell them that I will indulge that note as long as the person who gave it is willing to sit across a table from me and tell me what it means to be blacker. I want you to have a conversation with me and tell me that. And of course, that note went away. Because they didn't want to have a tremendous lawsuit on their hands, I'm sure. Yeah. So, but you know that had been an experience that I'd had. That kind of idea of these rigid specifications about what it means to be Black and what Black life looks like and how one can be blacker. Like this, these are sort of like things that I experienced when I was a journalist as well, even before I started working in film and TV. And so, I found Erasure about a few months later, as I said, and I started reading it. And not only was it about sort of like the limitations put on Black creatives and sort of Black artists and Black life in general, it was also, it was about a Black writer living in Los Angeles I'm a black writer living in Los Angeles. It was about, this sibling dynamics. Monk, the lead character, has 2 siblings. I have 2 siblings. We have a very push and pull relationship like the characters in the book. We have a very overbearing father figure like the father in the book. My mother didn't die of Alzheimer's, but my mother died of cancer about 8 years ago, and toward the end of her life, I moved home to help take care of her, like the character in the book. So the more that I read it, it just started to feel, the way that I tell people is like it started to feel like somebody had written a book specifically for me. Like somebody sat down and said, this is a book for Cord Jefferson, like they'd given me a gift. And so it just was, Monk's life and my life was, the Venn diagram was becoming a circle. And so it just felt like, about 50 pages in, I wrote to my manager and said, I think I found a book that I want to adapt.
But you didn't make a movie, Erasure. You made a movie, American Fiction. So in changing the title of it all, what does that different title say about it? When I read Erasure, I mean, I could see it was a model that basically said black stories have been erased. They have been suppressed.
Yeah.
And if those stories are not erased and suppressed anymore, and we could just have more of them, then normality can continue.
Yeah.
In some ways that black people had just been excluded, and the solution was to include more stories. But I think your title, American Fiction, actually points to something bigger than that model. So I'm just wondering why that title?
Well, I think that one of the unfortunate things about, one of the realities, I'll say one of the realities, I won't say unfortunate. One of the realities about television and film versus novels is that you need to frequently make commercial changes in order to sort of like make it more appealing to a broader audience. And so, one of the first things that somebody said to me when we were talking about titles is somebody was like, well, we can't call it Erasure because people will think it's that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie from like the 90s, Eraser, and it's like too close. And so we shouldn't do that. So it shouldn't be Erasure. And it was like, okay, well then what should it be? And so when I sent out the script, the script, and I promise this will make sense. If you haven't seen the movie, once you see the movie, it'll make sense. But when I sent the script out to the actors to begin with and all the producers and stuff, the script was called Fuck. The movie was called Fuck. And so it just said Fuck by Cord Jefferson, based on the novel Erasure by Percival Everett.
So we're allowed to say that tonight.
I think so.
Because we're in LA.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
this is good. I'm feeling better already, Cord. All right. I can get a little looser here.
And so I sent it out, and everybody was like, well, I thought, like, at the first it was a gimmick. It was like, at the very least, it'll be, people will read it and say, like, what is this? And so, but then we got into it more and more, and it was like, fuck, like that was on the clapper on set, and that's what all the rap gifts said, fuck, and I was like, well, we're sort of like, we're there, it's done, and about 2 months before we locked the film, one of the producers called and said, we really have to. We can't call this movie Fuck. And they were like, well, we'll give you. And by that point, I was kind of digging my heels, and they were like, well, we can. I was like, why not? Because it's part of the film, and it's shocking, but it'll be provocative. And they were like, well, they won't rate the film. People aren't going to screen the film if it's not rated. Right. And then they said what you really don't want is if we call the movie. If somebody Googles "fuck movie," ours is not going to come up.
To be honest with you, if the movie were called Fuck, I'm not going to see it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I've seen that movie. But what I haven't seen is American Fiction.
and so one night I just went home and I said, okay, we gotta figure it out. And I started reading poetry. Because I just started thinking, like, let's just do some sort of like free association, right? We just started, and I think that one of the things that I like about poetry is that, it's just uses language, and sort of like it's less connected to narrative structure and things like that. And so just this idea of like, let's just try to think of just try to immerse myself in language. I also got a little bit stoned, if we're being honest. And so I was like, I'm going to get stoned and read poetry tonight.
This LA thing is really something. I am sensing a different crowd. Audience, don't get too excited about that. All right, probably they already are, but continue.
And so I initially went to a poem by Langston Hughes called Let America Be America Again. And I started reading that, and I thought, okay, America. There's a long history of like great films with the title America or American. Some of my favorites are like American Splendor, American Movie. There's sort of like a history of those, and so I was like, America, American. Let's use that. And then I started thinking of like, okay, how does that pertain to the story that we're telling? And then, American fiction came because it was like, okay, this is a pun, like a bookstore pun. But I think puns are the lowest form of humor, even though I say them a lot, unfortunately. But I was like, so what's more than that? And to me, the fiction that sort of like I'm getting at under there is that, you know, we have this kind of race in America is this kind of thing that's real and not real, right? Race in the world is this thing that's kind of real and not real, right? Like the vast majority of our scientists will tell us that there is no basis for race in sort of like this idea of DNA. Like we're all far more similar than we are different. Our nose width and hair texture really doesn't matter when it comes to our humanity, and sort of that's the Human Genome Project has shown this, all this. Anyway, and yet we have structured our societies in a way that suggests that race is real. We've sort of so on the one hand, race is not real, but racism is real, and sort of like the tension, the inherent tension between those two realities, to me is sort of like the grand fiction that sort of I was getting at in the title, and so that is sort of the idea beyond the pun.
I'm going to push your idea a little further because I really like this idea. Because basically, and I would be even more specific, the meaning of America is fiction. And it's a story that's been struggled over since the Constitution, since slavery, each iteration. And we live in each period of time that we live in has this same conversation about what is going to be at the heart of America. So once you let go of the whole notion that there is one truth and that you are writing fiction, not made up fiction like fake, but you're struggling over a story that can be agreed upon. In some ways, the notion American fiction is tapping into the moment we're in now, the meaning of America. That's what's being fought over. And also the stories that are being told. And we're hearing some pretty outrageous stories right now because we're in the middle of a presidential campaign. And I heard some pretty amazing stuff last week. I won't go into it. I'm sure you can fill in the blanks. So what's interesting is it's not just about race, it's about black people in America. And that's a particular kind of American fiction, or a particular kind of fiction and a particular kind of America. So I felt that your movie gave us a lot of space to start looking at spaces of how we're writing that story by poking fun at sort of the boundaries or the barriers around it. The fact this guy's trying to get his book published and nobody wants to publish his book because he's not black enough. But he's in a setting where they're telling him you're too black in some ways. You have to be non-black in order to fit in with us. And that certainly is the story of my academic life. All right. So in many ways, I think we're talking about similar issues of race and representation, blackness and representation, but working in different industries.
Did you empathize with Monk? If the lead of the film is a college professor, and so so did you find yourself empathizing with a lot of his plight in the film?
I think we're really different people. And this is what I like about fiction, about plays and movies. We're open to our interpretation of it. I felt that you were actually kind to him in your film, Erasure. He was really a very awkward black man. All right. So now that you've told your own story, I'm a little concerned about making this point, but but I hope you're hearing this the right way. All right. Because this is kind of, to me, how do people like myself, and perhaps yourself, who are the first ones to arrive in certain settings, that we're desegregating this culture. That's what we're doing, whether it's in film or academia. And some of us get there earlier than others, but fundamentally, we're coming into contact with the norms of who's deciding what we're going to see and who we're going to be in terms of what you see, what movies we see, or what books we read. So I think, for me, we're fighting a really similar struggle for representation, but in very different institutional locations. I'm writing American fiction, too, as are a lot of people, right? So your movie, even though, I don't know if you were sort of sitting around thinking, that's pretty academic there, but, but that's what I do, and that's where I went.
Yeah, not at all. I was a horrible college student. I was a sociology major, but a terrible one at that.
Wait a minute.
But
Oh,
I
wait a
really wish I could go back and be a better student. But yeah, I mean, everything that you
Oh, no,
said, I fully agree with.
You don't want to be. You don't want to be a better student. You probably would not have been on the stage.
Maybe.
Because what
maybe.
happens is people get socialized into, we get disciplined into thinking a certain way. Academia is full of discipline. They're called academic disciplines for a reason. And for people who get so deeply disciplined, it's hard to be creative and be risk takers. You know, so to be a risk taker in an academic setting is being really sophisticated about how to work your way through it. It sounds like you as a risk taker just went in and said, well, I want to call it fuck, and then got everybody all upset kind of thing. Creatives, you may have more space to do that.
Yeah.
But it seems like the process is similar in terms of confining us to certain types of stories.
Yeah.
In my case, it would be scholarship. But I broke that mold, and I'm on the stage too. I was not disciplined quite well at all. So we might share a lot. So anyhow, I don't want to keep going on about that, but yeah, I've had an interesting career getting to the issues that you deal with in your film. Issues around race and representation, gender and representation, class, sexuality. So one thing that can happen in film that's easier than in academic articles is your characters can carry words that you want them to say because you're actually writing words for them. And your characters, to me, were really very interesting in terms of your gendered characters.
Oh, thank
Those
you.
monks at the middle, but then you had all these women. So, I had to look at the women because I wrote this book on Black feminist thought.
Yeah.
So I said, I wonder how's he doing with the women in this picture?
And how'd you think I do?
I think you made some interesting choices. Notice my choice of words here.
Okay. Interesting choices. Maybe I shouldn't have said thank you.
No. I really think you did a good job because I could see how the main character it's a male-oriented story, and the pressures and the tension there are between Monk and his brother and his father, who's not even there. All right, this is like the triangle that's really going on, and the women are basically context for that drama in the middle. That's how it came across to me.
Interesting. Yeah. So I think one of the themes of the film, one of the main themes is freedom and what happens when people do not feel free to be who they want to be. And I think that, and the sort of strange things that we start to do when we feel a lack of freedom and a lack of agency over our own lives. And so, as you pointed out, there's two characters who are sort of like most immediately going through that are Monk and his brother Cliff. And it's two different sort of like versions of that, right? So Cliff has been hiding his sexuality for his entire life, and now he wants to live free and sort of like actually live his truth and be the kind of person that he wants to be. And Monk is doing the same thing, just sort of like in a different lane. And to me, there's so much of my own life in this story that it's sort of that I may, unless you know me, it doesn't necessarily come across on screen, but that is a sort of thing that I did not feel free to be the kind of person that I wanted to be for many, many years in my life, up until very recently, actually. And it's one of those things is because as I mentioned, my overbearing father, I love my father very much. He's a wonderful man in many ways, but he would admit that he's overbearing. And my dad was born in 1942. He's going to be 83 next year. He is a Vietnam veteran, and he was the way that I sort of like learned to be a man growing up was just to be stoic. And you don't talk about your problems. You don't whine. Men sort of like don't share what they're feeling and their emotions. And if their emotions are negative, you tuck them down deep tight and you go on with your day. And that's sort of what it means to be a man. And it wasn't until the thing sort of like, it wasn't until, as I said, recently that I really started sort of taking control of that. But throughout my life, and one of the things that sort of I wanted to reflect in the women in the film is that the people who were always trying to get me out of that were the women in my life. Always. It was either romantic partners or my mother or relatives. They were always the ones who were sort of like that were the ones who took it upon themselves to try to break through that barrier and try to sort of like open me up.
I really appreciated sort of the finely drawn characters that you had. I thought the women were, excuse me, they were real women. I didn't feel like I was seeing anything. So much of what's in film is just basically superficial. You know, people are sort of standing there and sort of we project onto them who we want, how we want to see them. But these women, even if they weren't central, they were crucial to the story that you were telling. And I'm comfortable. I'm a kind of person who's comfortable with what is the main story that you're telling. When you read a novel, you could just go all over the place. You can have multiple things going on. But when you have a through story like this that you're looking at in a film, it was nice to see those relationships among men, thinking about those issues. But at the same time, we're in a culture where women are often expected not to be free, or they're expected to put their dreams for freedom in support of men. And I think it's really telling that in both the book, I'm not giving anything away, in both the book and in the film, the woman, their sister is the one doing all the work in that family that is helping them have the freedom that they have. And that's deliberate in the book, and it's certainly, it's not a judgment. It's just reality.
Oh, yeah,
that
that's
you're
one of
able
the-
to examine.
That's one of the things that I want. I mean, I think that another, you know, obvious theme in the film is aging and sort of like what happens when and loss and grief about sort of like our parents getting older. And one of the realities is that, you know, frequently caretaking in families is left to the female members of the family. It's left to the sisters and the mother and the aunts, and sort of like it's not. And so I have 3 brothers. I'm sorry, I have 2 brothers. So, but we're all 3 men, and so we didn't sort of have that. But when I thought about, you know, who should be the sibling that's sort of like the caretaker, that is the one sort of like home. It's sort of, you know, history and sort of like reality suggests that would be the sister, and that made sense to me.
And along with a woman who is like a member of the family, who is caring for everyone in the family. So I don't think this is, don't hear this in any way as a criticism. This is more a question of, it gets at the complexity of these relationships. And I think you really handle that well. And the nice thing about now is we have so many more films that we can see. We don't have to pin everything on one film. You're free to express a particular story, as are others. The concern for me is who gets to decide what we see and what we don't see. And that's the whole risk taking.
No, absolutely. That to me is one of the. So this movie, when we sort of like took it out to look for distribution, we met with sort of like everybody in town. We met with every streamer, every big studio. We sort of did the rounds. We did 14 or 15 meetings, and I remember sort of somebody who was working on the film with me called and said, you know, there's going to be a bidding war. Get ready. There's a huge appetite for this. And it was like, really? And it's like, oh yeah, get ready for it. And I was like, okay, great. And so we went out and had these 15 meetings. Everybody was sort of very enthusiastic in the meetings. And then when it came time to make offers, it was like silence. Just like, no, yeah, it was just nothing. And I was like, well, where's the bidding war, guys? We got 2 offers. One of the offers was millions of dollars less than the production budget on the film. So we sort of like really got 1 offer. And it is, look, the correlation does not equal causation, but the 1 offer that we got, the real offer, was from Orion, and the head of Orion happens to be a black woman named Alana Mayo. And she was the one who said, you know what, you've never directed a movie before, you've never written a movie before, but I'm gonna take a risk on you. I'm gonna take a risk on you and give you this opportunity. And it changed my life. And I think that like that is, yeah, sure, give it up for Alana. And I think that, I really do think that was, that, you know, I say this not to brag about this, but like the Hollywood Reporter did like a thing about people who are trying to affect change in this industry, and they asked me to be a part of it. And one of the questions that they asked us to answer was, how can you tell when people are just paying like lip service to DEI? And I said, to me, it's always when you have like black people and women and Latinos in the brochures and on your Instagram, but none in the C-suite. None sort of like actually making decisions about what you do and don't do. And I think that that's exactly right. It's worrying about worrying about that to me is sort of and so in the film when you see Monk and Centaura sort of like butt heads. That was they're sort of like, I don't want to spoil anything, but that was sort of like I used to be that kind of guy. I used to be that kind of artist, and I used to be like, why is that person making that movie? Oh my God, what an embarrassment! Like I can't believe they get to do that. This is awful. And it used to be sort of like sniping at other people, particularly other black people who sort of were making work. And a real growth in my life and a real growth in my creative career was when I realized like that's not the right question. The right question is, why are the people atop all these institutions? Why are the people who greenlight films and greenlight novels and greenlight whatever culture, why are they so interested in telling the same story over and over and over again about black people? Why are they so interested in telling slavery stories all the time? Why are they so interested in telling, like, inner city poverty stories all the time? Why are they so interested in sort of seeing black people in sort of like in completely brutal and difficult circumstances? Why is that what you want to fund over and over and over? And it's like, far be it from me to criticize an artist who's just making art and trying to make a living in a creative career. It's, to me, the sort of like bigger question is like, it's what you said. Why are the gatekeepers up here? Why are they making that decision?
A lot of my work has really looked at images. In my first book on Black Feminist Thought, I introduced this idea of controlling images. And not just stereotypes. People will think of a stereotype and you fix racism by just changing your mind and saying you have inaccurate information about that person or that group of people. We're going to educate you and then all will be well. Well, it's more than that. These images are deeply embedded in our institutions and how they run. And it isn't just an individual decision. It's what helps us make sense. So if you think about controlling images of black men, that they're violent, that they can't think, that their sexual libido is out of control, that they must be controlled, that they're a threat to society. Those particular representations don't have to be in all the films, but they are part of the air that we breathe. Similar issue around black women in terms of mammy, matriarch, the mule, all of that. So when you live in a society that's as hierarchical as ours is, and where race is really woven into the fabric of society itself, these aren't just benign ideas. And we're responsible for swimming upstream to push back against them. And that doesn't mean pushing back against them by saying, oh, we'll just have only heroic black people and we've solved the problem. There's plenty of space for those kinds of films. There's got to be space for artists to take on hard topics. Like your book takes on the topic of who are the gatekeepers for what we see. And it does it in a way that is actually very entertaining, but it's a very serious topic. So we're at a moment now where I just think if we're not careful, and you quite rightly point out that the gatekeepers are everywhere, but we have to occupy those positions in order to make these decisions.
Absolutely.
All right.
I totally agree. And I think that to me, I lost my train of thought. You know what? I'm sorry.
The part in your movie about the National Book Award, really stood out for me because his book, the protagonist was serving on a committee to choose the best book of the year. And this is a completely subjective decision. Mm-hmm. So, and I actually served on a committee like this. There were 5 of us on the committee, and I was on a nonfiction committee, and we did get 500 books that showed up then during that year. And I thought, this is crazy. What standards are we using to decide what's good and what's not good?
Yeah.
And lo and behold, there were no standards. It was idiosyncratic in terms of the 5 of us and sort of the muscle, flexing that we could do in that situation. And I was the rookie, so I'm like, I don't know if I can rock the boat as much as, I'm happy to be here kind of thing.
Yeah.
Until a guy from the library, who was a very powerful guy in New York, said, this should be the book. This is the book of the year, people. And so we really were a contentious committee. And it was, and you sort of solved that issue by, let's vote 3-2. Yeah. All right, that was an easy out. But the point that I'm making here is that the standards that we adhere to of what's true, what's beautiful, what's wonderful, what's important, are all politically motivated. They're all politically contested. There are always multiple points of view on everything. The movies that didn't get made because yours got made. I'm happy yours got made, but there's all that talent out there.
Absolutely.
It doesn't make it because these rules basically are arbitrary in many ways.
Absolutely, and I think that, I mean, especially in an industry like this, when so many things are made based off of relationships and previous sort of like work that you've done. I think that, you know, the thing that really sort of like frustrates me about this, well, there's a million things that frustrate me about this industry, but when somebody says, you know, when people pay lip service to the idea of we need to bring in outside voices, you know, we need to bring in marginalized voices, sort of like the lip service thing that I was talking about, but they forget to sort of like forget the necessity that in order to bring in outside voices, you need to be willing to take a risk on people who have not had their voice heard before. That's literally sort of like the name of the game. You
To be
have to
honest with you.
you have to center them and say, okay, you've never been given an opportunity before. Let's take a risk.
And you also have to be prepared to get out of the center yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm saying. I'm taking it to the next level. You know, which is, you know, it's not enough like let me in for a while so I'll, you know, you feel better because it doesn't look as the way it used to look. You know, I'm the one that's the twofer, the da-da-da. I can go through all that kind of thing. But it's more a question of the center itself is what needs to be challenged.
Well, that to me was always one of the things that I think is, you know, slavery movies, slavery movies, I think sort of like do two things for white audiences, right? The first is it lets them, there's white people there. So it lets them, so they're not seeing a movie that's just all black people, right? Because sort of like that's a bridge too far. Yeah, exactly.
Can't have that.
Yeah, exactly. Despite the fact that I was raised on movies full of just all white people when I was a kid, and I
Doesn't
loved
seem to
them.
bother people.
Yeah, and it's just like, well, that's just how life looks. Why do we have to see it? But the second thing that it allows them to do is it says like, that's what racism looks like. Racism, look, that guy's lynching a guy. He's burning a cross. I would never do something like that. I would never do that. That's clear. That's what racism looks like, and it sort of allows you to sort of like fall into this lull of like, I'm not part of the problem. I can't be part of the problem because that's what the problem looks like, and I would never do something like that. And so I think that sort of like that kind of centering of not only just sort of like centering those characters of white characters in a film. You know, famously, people said that 12 Years a Slave probably wouldn't have been made had Brad Pitt not sort of like said, okay, I'll take this on. If you actually look at if you want a funny Google 12 Years a Slave Italy poster. And it's Brad Pitt's face huge, and then you get like the smallest image down here in the corner of the black lead of the film, Chiwetel. But I think that it also centers. So besides centering white people, it also centers the desire to sort of like not feel bad.
Well, that's where we are now because you see, before desegregation, that desire had to be cultivated. So, you know, I think I grew up in a society where I never came into contact with white people much at all, except at school. So we're such a segregated society around so many things that no one wants to be the bad guy. No one wants to, you know, carry the weight of So we have all these movies to me that are dealing with white anxiety around this whole term white fragility. Now, I'm much more interested. I think white people are going to be okay. All right, that's kind of how I look at it. I would rather spend my time thinking about who are the audiences that are consuming these films and how much are we censoring ourselves based on how we're showing films or producing films. I think of this in my own work. How careful I have to be when I send a piece to one publisher versus another publisher or one journal versus another journal, in terms of choosing my words carefully. But it's like my first book, Black Feminist Thought. It's about black women. But I had to write that book in such a way that it was academic. It had integrity. It was my first book, kind of like your first film. But I had to write it in such a way that it was truthful and I could go through that white gatekeepers to the people on the other side so they recognized the issue. And they were people were quite willing to sort of go through that kind of work. I mean, we're used to looking at films that way and reading books that way, to find ourselves in there and the truth of our stories in there.
I actually wonder, you know, I think, as you said, we sort of like deal with similar issues, but it's different industries. Do you find it, because, you know, the academia is supposed to be a world of rigorous thought and sort of like consideration. Like, do you find that those conversations about race and about white fragility and those things are easier in sort of the university environment where people are sort of thinking about these things all the time? No.
No, I think they're tedious at this point. I think they're institutionalized. I think they're sort of almost like, I think we're doing more theater than you are. All right, that's how I feel very often. So, in many ways, it's sort of like, I can't take all the self-censorship and trigger warnings and all this kind of stuff. It's really hard to have open conversations. This is what I really appreciated about your movie. Like, I'm going to call it my pathology. Now I'm going to call it fuck. It was in your face. All right, that was really nice. All right, so I'm just laughing away when I heard that part, because, it's really, everyone's so careful that you never can get to, you don't know how to talk to each other, give and take anymore. And I think that is a real concern with intellectual work. And for me personally, I think a lot of it is scripted in ways that it didn't used to be, because universities are becoming more like, they are businesses, they always were, but they're more like businesses. At least your guys will tell you, we got to make money on your movie and we don't think your movie's a moneymaker, so therefore we're not going to fund it. That's kind of fundamentally the same thinking, but sort of academic work has to kind of think, how will I adhere to these norms? And the norms have always been favoring certain groups of people, mainly white people, men, straight people. All of that is still there. So we're in the middle of a period of tremendous change. And I'm optimistic because each generation does better, but that doesn't mean it's like a struggle. So I've been curious about all these kind of awkward black people and where they've come from, that are sort of like, like Issa Rae, I'm insecure, and in LA, I'm like, what's going on in LA? I thought I gotta come here and check this place out.
I think that to your point about the sort of like trigger word, like I think that one of the things that was important to me about it was important to me that this. I told them that the marketing was important to me in the film, and that we not only market this film to black audiences. I, of course, wanted black people to see it. I understood sort of like emphasis on sort of marketing toward black audiences, but I also wanted white audiences to see it too. And I sort of wanted people who maybe were going to be confused about how they felt by the story to see it. And I think that, and I think
good.
Exactly. And I think that one of the things that I think we have lost the ability to do in this country is really talk to people who believe differently than we believe. I think that that's sort of like really gotten to a bad place where we sort of have lost the ability to sort of see somebody who sort of votes differently than us or has a different religion than us, and just sort of like have a conversation. And I I grew up in a very weird household where my father was a black Republican. He's always been a Republican. Since the day he could register to vote, he was a Republican. And my mother was a white liberal. And so I grew up in this household seeing where nothing was taken for granted. Nothing was sort of spoon-fed to me. It was always like, sort of frustratingly, every conversation was like a rigorous exercise and sort of like, my dad's also a lawyer, so it's like it felt like very on the stand all the time. But I think that sort of, I feel fortunate that I grew up in that kind of environment, because I saw very early, like, oh, people can have different beliefs and still love each other and still sort of sit down to a meal together and still enjoy each other's company, even though they sort of vote for different people. And I think that to me is something that we've lost in America that we really need to get back.
I think let me just respond to that, because for me, it's a notion of the ability to think critically and come to your own conclusions, to really take a stand and be willing to revisit your own stand, so that you're not, if you figured out truth when you're 14, well, I don't know, you and Jesus figured out truth when you were 14. But the rest of us are continuing to grow and to change and to think. And what happens is this whole notion of never backing down. I think it's our responsibility to try and give people texts and things to see and read and think about that push them to have conversations. So there's no, there's the discussions around your film in a classroom, if I were teaching it, I think would be really rich if I have a classroom that's a diverse classroom, or an all-black classroom that's going to argue about the class politics actually in your film. Not argue, but they're going to analyze that. So we've kind of lost the ability, or I think we need to get, not that we ever had this, let me be clear about this. I think what we need to cultivate is the ability to have critical conversations with people who differ from us, and who differ from us in terms of how they look and how they think and all of that. This is what I see as being at the heart of sociology. That's the kind of sociology I do, and that's the kind of sociology that I encourage other people to do. So it isn't just a question of we hold ideological positions and we yell at each other from one position or another. We really engage these ideas for bigger issues. Back to American fiction. It's kind of like, what is America going to be? What is its future? Can it move into the future with this degree of what you've just described as the moment that we're in? It's always been polarized. Now it's public.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, to me, I think that there's something that sort of like hyper right-wing conservatives say that I actually agree with, which is that the diversity of America weakens us. That is something that I actually believe in. I think that the reason we can't have a place like, we can't sort of like, when you travel to like Nordic countries, if you go to Sweden or Denmark and everybody's like, oh, or Japan, and everybody's like, they run so well and it's all clean
Okay.
and they're all nice. Hold on.
No, Corbett, we have a minute and a half, and that's not going to be the last thing we're going to hear.
Hold
So
on.
I'm just letting you know.
Hold on.
I'm looking
Hold
over
on.
here.
Hold on.
All right.
Hold on.
Okay, excuse us for a minute, people.
Hold on. We can go over. It's
Okay, fine.
we
I
can
just
go over,
want to
it's
make
fine.
sure we're not going to stop with that.
No, we're not going to
All
stop
right.
with that. My point is that the reason that sort of like those kinds of countries work like that is because when somebody gets government assistance in Copenhagen and Denmark, they're like, oh, that person looks like me, and if I fall into that situation, I would want help. And I think that there's sort of like the same thing that goes in these very homogenous societies. I actually think that like our tribalism in America does make things more difficult for us. That being said, if we can overcome that, we will be the most powerful nation in the world.
That's
if we
the
can just start looking at somebody and saying like, oh yeah, that's like welfare wasn't a big problem when it was white farmers getting it. Then everybody was like fine with white farmers getting it because that looks like me. But the minute that sort of like black people started taking welfare, then it's like, well, this is we got welfare queens. This is a problem. All I mean to say is that diversity is hindering us, and the problem is if we can just get over that, if we can just learn to look at another person and say like, that's an American, and get over this shit of like, well, that's a queer person or a Latino person or like Haitians. Like, my God,
I think
it's
I would say this is a period where people are noticing all the stuff that was there all along. All right, so it's not a question of like not noticing it and then we can sort of be homogeneous. I mean, there has to be something bigger that pulls people together, and technically it really should be the dream of America, right? The notion of a society that has equal opportunity, that helps people. You know, there are bigger ideas that we can unite around. It's not a question of uniting around a particular identity, all right, but it's sort of a set of principles that we are working toward. That's the Constitution, to build a more perfect union. That's what it's all about. It's an unfinished project. Now, there's no going back, and we've heard that this week too. There's really no going back because the world is in fact global. It is incredibly heterogeneous. There is migration everywhere. They're flashing these things to us, like giving us notice.
it says
like,
please transition
please,
to Q&A.
please transition to Q&A. They're begging, all right, at this point, before we get sued by somebody. But no. I mean, I think to pull us back to your film, you know, this is the kind of conversation that people should get in a room and say, I recognized myself in your film and I didn't like what I saw, or I'm curious about how I was depicted in your film, and with each other, not with you, but, you know, with each other, in terms of why have I not heard this story? I wonder if people around me are thinking these things. Why is it that when I go into the bookstore, I'm seeing all these books that tell me that black life is all about urban and poor and poverty, this, that, and the other? Why am I not seeing other things? Why am I not seeing stories about issues that black middle-class people have? It's not all Barack and Michelle Obama with two perfect kids and they're in the White House. Come on. You know, we can aspire for that? No, there's more to it than that. So I really think there's a lot of space for artists and intellectuals to help with these bigger issues.
I totally agree. I just think that the artists and intellectuals need the people with the money to give us the money.
Or to get the money themselves.
Yeah.
And then fund each other. All right, let's try that.
That's
all right?
absolutely true.
Okay. We're supposed to be doing something now.
Okay, an
Question and answer?
audience
Yeah,
Q&A.
it says Q&A here. If you don't have any questions, we'll just keep going. Oh, someone has a question.
Here we
darn
go,
it.
right up front. They're coming with
coming with
microphones.
mics.
Okay. Hi there.
Hi.
Well, hi. Yeah, we see you. You can wave. Come on.
Okay. actually, kind of on that subject, what you guys were talking about, just like the kinds of stories that can be told and so forth. It got me thinking. Um, I'm okay,
It's all right.
okay. It made me think back to a question of, well, not every storyteller represents their own story. Like, plenty of us tell stories about events we ourselves have never experienced, or sometimes from points of view that aren't our own. Sometimes this is inspired by friends of ours. Like, for example, one example that comes to mind is the Owl House, which, even though it was made by a white woman, stars a Latina lead who she based off her best friend. And another example is Avatar: Last Airbender, which is kind of an interesting case, I think, where I remember attending a panel with one of the show's co-creators who was asked about this issue and was kind of humble about it, and he admitted that he didn't consider his efforts perfect. He said he probably made mistakes here and there, but still did the best he could. And I guess my question is, his advice as a storyteller wasn't to, quote, write what you know, but to write with empathy. And I'm curious, what's your perspective on this approach and on this kind of idea?
I think that to me the thing that I always think about, I believe this is a Martin Scorsese quote. I don't know if that's true, so don't quote me on it. But he says the specific is universal, and I think that is something to keep in mind. So I wrote on the show Succession, and I've never hung out with white billionaires. I've certainly never hung out with the Murdochs. And when I went into that room, I was like, well, I hate these people. Okay. And but the thing that you realize when you get in there is I worked on the second season, so these characters were already sort of established by the time that I got there. But the thing that you realize is the trick, the greatest trick that Succession pulled was getting people in New York and Los Angeles to give a shit about the Murdochs and feel bad for them. And the way that they did that was, look, we don't. I've never been a white billionaire. I probably will never be a white billionaire. And so, but I sort of understand sibling rivalry. I understand wanting to please my father. I understand having sexual hangups. I understand addiction issues. Like, these are things that I do understand, and it's what makes up the human being. And so I think that, writing with empathy, I think, is the same thing as the specific is universal. If you actually dig down into human emotions, then that's all that anybody cares about. Because look, we are different in some ways, but we're much more similar than we are different. And like, even at the end of the day, we just all feel jealousy. We feel joy. We want to fall in love. We want to have children. We want to make music. We sort of, like, the human experience is one that I think really unifies us. And so, to me, that's all you really need to sort of write about other communities.
Up to a point. I think you're right. Yeah, up to a point. But I think when you're really talking about the humanity of Black people, which in many settings is not recognized as humanity, it is really taking a really strong stand to write about the particularities, the specifics of Black people, and have that be seen as universal, as opposed to the specifics of Blackness. And that's really what's in this film. This guy is really confined to a certain kind of Blackness that other people want to see, because other than that, they can't understand anything that they're seeing. So in some ways, telling a specific is crucial, particularly in how we tell the specific. I mean, tell it in ways that you can empathize with the humanity of the people, because we're coming back from a racism that basically sees Black people, has depicted Black people and many others as not human. So this is really an important point in terms of writing that particular story, but then there are many other stories that are similar. So yeah, I think there's a lot of dots to connect between sort of our general humanity and the particular situations that we're in that we really have to challenge. We also have to think about how our art contributes to or does not contribute to social change, all right, and be able to think about that critically. And it may not, or it may, all right, but it's not something that is just an idle afterthought. Not when the power of the media, of power of film. It's too powerful to just like leave that to the filmmakers. I'm sorry. Another question?
Yeah. Who's got the? Yeah.
Here
Go
in the
ahead.
front. So, Cord, you and I went to high school together.
Oh my God.
CDO.
Oh my
CDO,
God.
CDO.
Are you serious?
I am so serious, yes, and I do remember you. You might not remember me, but I'm just wondering how much of Tucson inspired the great American fiction. I know it's mentioned in the film.
Yeah. Wow. Were you my year?
98.
98. All right. All right. All right. I was 2000. So I would say that what Tucson did. So Tucson sort of, I think Tucson is very much in my blood, and I've thought a lot about sort of like what being raised in Tucson did for me. And I think one of the things that Tucson did was it made me feel alienated in a real way, because Tucson is diverse in that there's Latinos, but then outside of that, there's nothing, right? It's not like our school showed us, right? At the time, our high school was the largest high school in Southern Arizona. It had 3,300 kids in it, and I think probably I would guess like 25 to 30 black kids max, maybe, half of whom are like my family. And so on the one hand, it sort of like made me feel very alienated. I felt different. I was this black kid with a weird name, and I moved to Arizona from Saudi Arabia. I had this weird experience, and I remember kids picking on me because I hadn't been to Disneyland, and I said, "Well, have you been to fucking Saudi Arabia?" No. I can go to Disneyland. You're not going to go to Saudi Arabia. But the thing, sort of like it made me feel like an outsider, and sort of like I think that is, I think that frequently artists feel like they're outsiders and feel like they don't have a space to sort of share their voice, and so they look for sort of like other outlets through which they can talk about their emotions. That being said, what Tucson also did though was kind of what I was talking about earlier, which was like when I went to school, I was like, well, I'm going to school with a bunch of white kids, and so I need to figure out how to interact with these people. I need to figure out how to build bridges, because sort of I'm going to be different from them, and if I want to have friends and be social at all, then I need to figure out how to talk to a bunch of white kids and a bunch of Latino kids and sort of like figure out how to build bridges there and sort of like become friends with people. And so it did, I think, offer me, it offered me that alienation, but it also sort of like forced me to overcome that alienation and sort of like find friendships with people who were different from me. And I, to this day, my best friends in my life are kids that I went to high school with. Like those are all, I just saw a bunch of them. Like they're gun owners. They're sort of like Republicans. They're sort of like, some of them are, not all of them, but they're people who are different from me. And I think that I really value that. I really value sort of those relationships, because it's what I was talking about earlier. It's like we're different, but I love you. And you sort of like, we can be different and still love each other, and that's okay.
I think it's important for each of us to see. I don't see white people as just white people. Some of my best friends are white because I see them as people, and I see the range of what's involved with these relationships. But earlier, if we're living in a segregated society, where we basically don't come into contact with the range of all the people who are there, we don't have the opportunity to form friendships and to see people for who they are. That school may have looked all white to you, but the diversity that existed among white people was huge. But we don't see that because race collapses all that. So I think white people do not honestly see how whiteness doesn't help sometimes. It's a huge barrier. So we're in a period of time of change. And I would like to think that your film and my work are sort of making real contributions to help people do all of this. I'm sort of talking about the responsibility of the artist at this point.
Yeah.
So I don't know where we are with this. What do you
We
think?
got one more question.
We got one more question.
The people with the microphones can choose, because I don't.
Here in the back.
Hi, my name is Kennedy. I wanted to ask, as a young Black filmmaker, I'm curious, like, what are your strategies you can share for getting your early work seen by different people?
Getting your work seen by different people?
Your work early on.
I think that I think that the most concrete thing that I can say is, I mean, are you a writer? Yes. I mean, if you're a writer, well, if you're a director too, I mean, these days, if you're making stuff, getting it seen is relatively easy, right? It's just like put it on the internet. That's what everybody does. That's not what I did. I was sort of like I don't have that skill set. I'm not. I don't do TikTok or anything. But I just feel like, a lot of I don't know. Like it just. Are you talking about get seen by like people in the industry? Just whatever? Okay. I mean, I think that for me it would be you just need to write all the time and make stuff all the time and constantly be putting it out and showing your friends and putting it on the internet and asking for help from your colleagues and sort of, when I say ask for help, I mean like ask for notes. I just think that sort of making stuff is just how you get better and sort of like how you get people to see your work is
I
just
also think
constantly making.
I also think if you're an artist, you must do it. The people who really are artists or poets or they're dancers or they're singers or they're filmmakers, they get day jobs to fund their own art. It'd be nice if somebody else funded it. But we have all this talent of people who have something to say. And the issue is to do it because 100 years ago it wasn't there. These opportunities weren't there. And we're finding and discovering the legacy of all this genius and all this talent and all this creativity. Sometimes it is not recognized. The world is not fair. I had to know on the front end, I'm going to write something people may not ever read, but I'm going to write it anyhow. And as of today, I've written 11 books, all right? And people have read them. So my point is you never know when you're on the front end. You just have to believe that what you're doing is right and that your craft, of course you get better by doing it. So that's what you all have to do. It's not like you come finished and brilliant. That's not the way it starts, all right? It is work. It's the craft of doing intellectual work and creative work and artistic work, whatever your field. Yours is writing, but there are many other people here, I'm assuming, are appreciative of creative work because I came here today to say this is really important for the culture that we're in. What you do is really important. So I'm here to tell you that.
Thank you.
Okay, now I said it. That's it. Not going to get any more. Enjoy that moment.
I think that the only thing that I will follow up with that is I completely agree with everything she just said, and I think that the thing to remember is that we are not athletes. Artists are not athletes. You don't need to get your best work done by the time you're 30 because your knees are going to give out. If anything, you're just going to get better. You're just going to improve because you're going to get smarter. You're going to read more. You're going to see more films. You're going to sort of you're going to experience more things as you age, and your work is only going to improve. And so I think that keep that in mind is that and exactly what she said. The thing that I tell everybody right now, like in this industry and starting out, is imagine in your mind, imagine what success looks like to you. Like really sort of like think of like an event or a moment that would be the pinnacle of success for you. And now imagine that never happens. Imagine you never achieve that. Do you still want to do the thing? And if it's no, then don't do it to start with, right? Because if all you're doing it for is like that specific moment, I'm going to make a bunch of money. It's going to be the day that I get $1 million. It's going to be the day that I win an award. Like that is going to be, and look, I understand a guy with an Oscar saying this is like, fuck you. Look, I totally get that. I totally understand that. But what I'm saying is that when I started writing, it's what she said. I would come home from my day job and I would write every night just because I had to, because it was the one thing that made me feel good, because I was like miserable at work. I hated my day job and I would come home. I would cry on the way home, have to pull over to the side of the 10 freeway, coming back from Venice Beach to Silver Lake, and I would cry sometimes because I'd be like, my damn air conditioning went out. It's so hot. I have no money. This sucks. And then I would just go home and write, and it would make me feel better. And so imagine, Van Gogh died penniless. Kafka died in his 40s. I'm pretty sure he was an insurance adjuster. Edgar Allan Poe died literally in a gutter in Baltimore. Nobody knows how he got there. He died unfamous.
Okay, whoa. This is getting a little gloomy.
No,
I mean, could we move on to like I mean, you know, like
all this is
lots of all these dead artists. It's really not helping your
it's
point.
fair.
All
No,
right,
all
just-
this,
I wanted to help
is
you out
say,
here.
all this is to say that those people did it because they found value in doing it, not because they knew that they were going to be famous one day. And so I just think that everybody just find the value in the doing of the thing, and like don't worry about what happens on the other side. And that will give you a rich life no matter what, because you'll sort of like be able to fill it up with creativity.
I'm going to build on that just a trifle, then we're going to wrap up. I think I would say, for me, I loved to read because I had a mother who believed in reading, and she couldn't get a job doing anything that was like that: reading, writing, singing, art, anything. And when I found out that if I became a professor, they would pay me to read, I said, this is it. Now, granted, I didn't realize I would end up reading a lot of stuff I ended up reading, which were some of those papers, those student papers could have been a bit better, all right? But in other cases, they were quite magnificent, because the land of ideas, the world of ideas, is a beautiful place to be able to live. And to know that you're participating in knowledge work and thought work, and that ideas are durable. They travel. You may not be here to see where your ideas go, but that's the kind of work you do. You do it every day. You write because you have to. You write because you want to. And if you're lucky, you have a career at it. But there's so many wonderful people in this country who don't have that, but they still have the passion. So we can do better in how we do our art.
That's it. It says we got to wrap up. Thank you all.